Hola, buenas tardes. A nombre de La Tercera y La Otra Mirada, les queremos dar la bienvenida a este seminario, online por supuesto. Para La Tercera es un momento muy importante. Nosotros entendemos que nuestra labor de información crece en estos tiempos de crisis y hemos tratado de abordarlo de tres formas. La primera es informar, que es nuestra primera función, nuestra primera labor. Informar de lo que está pasando, de cómo vamos avanzando, de lo que está sucediendo fuera de Chile, dentro de Chile, de las medidas que hay que tomar, de cómo podemos evaluar las políticas públicas y hacia dónde vamos. La segunda manera es acompañarlos en sus casas. Nuestras plataformas online hoy están con 25 millones de usuarios al mes. Y nosotros estamos produciendo material de distinta manera para poder acompañar en estas cuarentenas voluntarias o obligatorias a todos ustedes. Y la tercera, y quizás la más importante, de labor, de comunicar, es proyectar lo que viene, es entender cómo será este mundo nuevo que nos queremos imaginar, esta nueva realidad que no sabemos realmente cuál será, cómo nos vamos a relacionar, cómo vamos a trabajar, qué es lo que viene, cuán grave será esta recesión que se nos anuncia por delante, qué empresas van a quedar, qué trabajos van a subsistir. Iremos a trabajar desde las empresas, iremos a trabajar desde la casa, qué tan tecnologizado quedará el mundo. Y una segunda pregunta fundamental es cómo se ordenará nuevamente el mundo, qué países adquirirán un liderazgo distintivo en los tiempos que vendrán. Hay muchas dudas respecto al rol que ha jugado Estados Unidos y al rol que podrá jugar en el futuro. Hay dudas sobre el comportamiento de Europa. Y también hay una gran incertidumbre o una gran pregunta respecto al rol de China. Ahí partió todo y ahí puede terminar todo. Hay mucha gente que ya está hablando de que China será el gran gigante de las próximas décadas. Eso a veces a algunos les preocupa, a otros no tanto. Nosotros solo queremos analizar, entender lo que viene y lo que podemos esperar. Es por eso que en este seminario contaremos con la presencia de un gran y destacado intelectual, Joongang Sorman, que ha estudiado mucho esto y es por eso que también estamos muy felices de colaborar con La Otra Mirada en esta otra forma de informar, de comunicar y de entendernos. Muchas gracias.
Políticamente muy correcto invitar a alguien a hablar sobre el ordenamiento mundial post-pandemia, donde China juega un rol muy importante, a quien se refiere a ese país como el imperio de mentiras. Pero sabemos que Joongang Sorman no tiene pelos en la lengua para hablar de ningún tema, y tampoco los tendrá para referirse al ordenamiento mundial post-pandemia. Dado que Chile es un país del este del Pacífico, muy dependiente de Asia y en particular de China, con quien estamos cumpliendo 50 años de relaciones bilaterales, con todo lo que ello significa, nos parece que Guy puede compartir con nosotros la otra mirada que necesitamos en un momento particularmente confuso y desafiante. Al parecer, nos movemos hacia un mundo menos integrado, donde las barreras comerciales y los muros vuelven a levantarse. En Estados Unidos, el motor tradicional de la globalización, ahora prevalece una visión más nacionalista, que lo lleva a abandonar su liderazgo de décadas sobre los asuntos mundiales, para privilegiar los asuntos domésticos, que es la carta que viene jugando Donald Trump en su actual gobierno y de cara a su reelección. China, por otra parte, que no tiene preocupaciones electorales ni menos de libertades civiles, sigue buscando espacios de influencia por doquier, ejerciendo una combinación de poder económico, potencia militar y, por supuesto, de poder blando o soft power, que hoy se manifiesta en la entrega de insumos médicos para ayudar a enfrentar la pandemia surgida de su mismo territorio. Aunque no lo admita, Europa Occidental se encuentra debilitada tras la salida del Reino Unido. El Brexit fue una poderosa señal de desglobalización que es difícil de olvidar. En potencias regionales como Rusia, Brasil y Turquía, también vemos gobiernos populistas y autoritarios. La construcción de un orden mundial legítimo y basado en reglas de convivencia aceptadas por todos, como proponía Henry Kissinger, parece estar cada vez más lejos. Incluso la democracia liberal, con sus pesos y contrapesos, siempre teniendo como norte el respeto por las minorías, parece poco eficaz para lidiar con los desafíos actuales. La última vez que nos reunimos, nuestro invitado Parag Khanna abordó la emergencia de Asia como una región coherente y consistente y nos planteó que el futuro le pertenece. Fue tajante al advertirnos que el orden mundial occidental sencillamente no existe más y no volverá. Nos explicó que los asiáticos tienen una visión muy pragmática sobre el rol del gobierno. Valoran la eficacia y son muy cautos con la indisciplina colectiva. El estallido social chileno, por ejemplo, con su cuestionamiento del ordenamiento institucional y su violencia desatada, sería algo impensado en países como Corea del Sur, Singapur y Taiwán. ¿Para qué decir en China, donde se acepta y justifica la existencia de un partido comunista todopoderoso, que promueve un capitalismo de Estado y le da cada vez, en forma controlada, más espacio al mercado, con tal de reducir sistemáticamente la pobreza que generó las políticas marxistas-leninistas de sus fundadores? ¿Y qué hay de Singapur, esa pequeña ciudad-estado, que de la mano de un autócrata ilustrado se convirtió en una de las naciones más modernas y eficientes del mundo, gracias a una burocracia profesional comprometida? El caso de Taiwán es notable también, una prueba de que la democracia no es ajena a la cultura china, y menos un obstáculo al progreso colectivo como creen en Beijing. En esos países, es cierto, las respuestas a la pandemia del coronavirus han implicado un invasivo monitoreo del aparato estatal sobre las vidas de las personas, gracias al empleo de la más moderna tecnología, que hace que nuestras cuarentenas, cordones sanitarios y toques de queda parecieran medidas anacrónicas. Por todo eso, estamos seguros que Guy Sorman nos va a abrir la mente en lo que respecta al fascinante desafío de darle sentido al mundo contradictorio que vivimos, donde pasamos de experimentar uno de los momentos de mayor progreso de la humanidad a una crisis económica a escala global, quizás no vista desde el gran desplome del año 1929, que fue la antesala de uno de los periodos más trágicos en el devenir de la especie humana sobre la Tierra. Al menos esa es la visión fatalista. La otra es que saldremos humanamente más fortalecidos y la crisis económica nos va a hacer más racionales y pragmáticos, porque no habrá espacio para sueños constructivistas utópicos, que suelen derivar en los peores infiernos, y los países deberán aceptar que la integración y la convivencia serán clave para superar una recesión que puede producir muchísimas más muertes y penurias que el mismo coronavirus. Como nunca, el contexto mundial en que nos desenvolvemos dictará en gran medida nuestras opciones como país. Bien vale la pena descifrar el dilema en el cual nos vemos envueltos. Bienvenidos a esta nueva edición de La Otra Mirada.
Well, first of all, thank you for your invitation. You know, I have a very strong connection with Chile. I try to go to your country as often as possible. But in these days, which are quite strange and dramatic, we have to use this new technique to communicate, but I think it's better than nothing. And we have to be very honest from the beginning. We are in the middle, not at the beginning, not at the end of a pandemic. It's a totally new situation. It's quite dramatic for many people. And I tend to think, without being able to predict, that they will be in this situation for quite a while. Experts talk about 1 or 2 years before reaching a vaccine, which would be the only way, reasonably, to put an end to this situation. In between, we'll be in a kind of stop and go situation. Sometime it would be better, which is the case today in Chile. It's where I am in New York. It's improving a little bit, but we are still very anxious. And we have to remember that they're all continents, and I'm thinking mostly of Africa, where billions of people could be infected, and it would be kind of a reservoir. So even if we are good in South America, in Europe, United States, you would have this reservoir staying on until we find a medical solution. So we have to keep in mind that maybe the situation in which we live right now should be considered as a normal or new normal situation, and we better live with it. Before getting into details regarding mostly economics and politics, I think this pandemic is teaching us a lesson. Dramatic events occur and we cannot predict them. All our economic, social models are always based on certainty. We think we can plan ahead and we behave accordingly. In fact, uncertain things do happen, and we have to know that uncertainty should be part of the model. In a way, I don't want to be too ideological or to sound too much as a classic liberals, but it's true that classic liberals since a long time always were very reluctant vis-à-vis planning, because planning, and mostly central planning, suppose that you know all the facts, you know all the parameters, you are in control. Well, we are not totally in control. So the first philosophical lesson of the current tragedy is that remember that we are not totally in control, and always remember that uncertainty should be part of your planning. And this is true for your individual life. This is true for political life and also in economics. So save some money and save some energy for the uncertain events which can occur. Now, if I turn to the current crisis and try to understand and analyze what is going on. Pandemics happened before. They are part of mankind history, I mean, since the Black Plague in the 14th century. And in the 20th century, of course, we had the so-called Spanish flu, which was a pandemic, which reached the whole world. In 57, we had the Asian flu. In 68, we had the Hong Kong flu, and so on and on and on. So you could say, well, this is not new, but it is new. It is new because of the virus itself, which is extremely contagious and which has the capacity to spread like light, I mean, extremely rapidly, and this has not been seen before. Also, because of accelerated globalization, you have a pandemic which is simultaneous all over the world. If you go back to the Spanish flu 1 century ago, it was everywhere, but it took nearly a year to reach all the continents. So at that time, people were not that conscious that they were impacted by a global pandemic. Now we know. We know because of the virus, but also because of media coverage. Media coverage makes a huge difference. We know minute by minute who is infected, how many people, how many are cured, how many die. And this has consequences because this media coverage doesn't leave politicians or even entrepreneurs the time to think. They have to act immediately. And it has positive and negative consequence. Positive consequence, you know you have to act, okay? But sometimes negative consequence, you make a hasty decision to lock down your economy, and maybe it was not that urgent, maybe it shouldn't cover all the fields, but because of media coverage and public opinion pressure, this gives politicians absolutely no choice. Also, media coverage does increase the anxiety. Everybody lives in anxiety today, which is justified and not justified. It's justified because the virus is really dangerous. It's not totally justified because 99% of the people will never catch the virus. So I don't want to make any judgment. I try to explain why this pandemic is different and why media coverage plays a very significant role, positive and negative, in coping with the pandemic. Positive because when a new cure, a new test, a new way to cope with the pandemic appears somewhere, immediately every medical team, every hospital in the world know how to ask, how to act, and to use the latest technique. So this immediacy, this coverage also has positive impact for the health of the people. Many medical mistakes which have been done at the very beginning are not repeated because of this media coverage. Now, another interesting observation, the pandemic started, let's say, in December in China, and in the rest of the world, February, March mostly, because before that the pandemic were there. But thanks to the Chinese, if I may say so, we were not informed. What I see today are enormous differences in the results in different countries. Why is it that the same virus doesn't bring the same consequences, doesn't have the same impact in different countries? So I've tried to understand this, and I will propose as hypothesis 5 different factors which may explain why some countries are doing better than others. The first one, of course, is reactivity. I mean, South Korea and Taiwan were first to understand that this was a very dangerous pandemic because these two countries are near China, they had some kind of experience with pandemic before, and they have a sense of danger because of the part of the world they live in. In Western Europe, in the United States, we don't have a very strong sense of danger. Danger is something very abstract and remote, so the reactivity was not the same, and the political decision and sanitary decision came a bit late, vis-à-vis a pandemic where 1 week makes a huge difference. Number two, second explanation, testing has been a key factor to explain why some countries are doing better than others. South Korea is best, and we can mention the South Korean model in a way. Germany did very good, and this explains why the number of deaths in South Korea and Germany is very small compared to the United States or France, where reactivity was slow and the testing was and still is a disaster. Number three, the importance of isolating the sick people. Once again, Korea has been the best example, not by closing the whole country, not by a total lockdown, but by tracing the clusters and attacking the clusters and isolating only the clusters and the people who were sick with the help of new technology like tracing, where now our countries will follow, but nearly 2 months later. Number four, explanation number four, the quality of the healthcare system. Once again, Korea and Germany come first. They have the best hospital, the best management, and the best healthcare all over the world. So we have to be very modest, and it's very difficult for the French to be modest, or even more to the US citizen, but we have to learn from better healthcare in these countries. Number five, leadership has been and remains absolutely essential. And the legitimacy of the leader is key to cope with the pandemic. The legitimacy of the French leader, regretfully, is very low. South Korean leader, very high. US leader, very low. So people, did not really believe in the instruction which were given to them. In Germany, where Angela Merkel has a very high score in legitimacy of South Korea, when these leaders say you have to quarantine, you have to be careful, you have to test, 99% of the people will follow. In the United States, no way. In France, no way. Italy, I won't mention. Spain, very low legitimacy of the leader, and people will not follow instruction. So leadership is key. Therefore, with these 5 parameters, I try to understand why some countries are doing better than others. Now let's turn to the economics. We are in a very deep economic crisis, but it's not really an economic crisis. I mean, it has nothing to do with economy as such. I mean, to make myself clear, if we compare the current situation with the 1930 depression or the 2008 recession, these two crises were systemic crises. I mean, in 1930, to make things short and superficial, is because the monetary policy was a disaster, and because international exchange was stopped, that the whole world went down into a deep crisis. So it was an economic crisis with economic causes. 2008, the cause was economic or financial. It was a disruption in the financial system, in the banking system, which had become unreliable, unsafe, which provoked the economic crisis. So they were systemic economic crises. Today, it's totally different. The economic institutions nationally and globally are in good shape. I mean, the banks are in good shape everywhere. The institution like the IMF or the World Bank is working very well. In Europe, the Eurozone is very well managed. The dollar as a currency has no problem, and the US banks are also in a good shape. If we look at the enterprises at firms, 3 months ago, they also were in a good shape, and we had economic growth everywhere and full employment in most of the developed countries, as we know, and many emerging countries in Asia were growing very rapidly. So basically, the economy was okay. And this economic crisis is only the consequence of the sanitary crisis. Therefore, it would be a very big mistake to bring economic solution to an absence of problem. When we have resolved the sanitary crisis, the economic crisis will be resolved. And to change the system would be really a wrong analysis. After having said that, I do not exclude that there will be strong ideological pressures to change the economy in the economic system. You already hear commentators, politicians, mostly from the left or the far left, or sometimes from the far right as well, saying, this is capitalism doesn't work, free market doesn't work, we need a stronger state, we need a more nationalistic economy, and we need controls and regulation and so on. Well, this is strictly ideological. It's not based in economic reality, which doesn't exclude the fact that it can happen and that these ideological pressures are part of an economic system. Economic system doesn't live, isolated. It lives surrounded with the political pressure. Having said that, I would not argue that everything was perfect in the economy. And of course, the crises do reveal some weakness. No, I would mention two of them very rapidly. First, we have a problem with the healthcare. It's very clear. I mean, no country has a perfect healthcare system, but all countries underpay the healthcare workers. This is a rule. Nurses, whose role these days are absolutely seminal, are not correctly paid and considered all over the world. Just a detail, but very significant. We take the healthcare for granted, so we have to think, everyone in his own country, to certainly improve this healthcare system. And the question is not to be private, public, non-profit. I mean, I think it should be a combination of all this kind of ownership, like everywhere. Also, because millions of people all over the world are severely impacted these days because they have lost their job, and you can understand not only their poverty, their anxiety for the future, for their family. I'm very much in favor for many, many years for some sort of basic guaranteed income from the state, and which would go beyond unemployment and the usual welfare thing. We have to find kind of a guarantee to say to people, even in the worst of the sanitary and economic crisis, I assure you that you will be able to live a decent life. This is a very old idea. I mean, it doesn't belong to any economist. It has been promoted by Milton Friedman, among others, but also some socialist parties in Europe are promoting that. We have to find some kind of basic guarantee. And this will also help the economy, because if the people have a personal guarantee in any circumstances, even in a case of crisis, they will not be hostile to free market. They will say that they will accept the efficiency in the free market, and they know that even in an open economy, they'll be able to survive whatever happens. So I think this is one of the lessons and one of the correction, I think, which should be introduced in our market economy. Now let's turn to globalization. There are so many philosophers these days and commentators and pundits and prophets, explaining that nothing in the future will be like before. I mean, I really don't know, because I'm no prophet, and before was not that bad after all. I mean, so to be more serious, what can we say and forecast about so-called globalization? First, I don't think that globalization as such is threatened. Why? Because globalization is a long-term trend. It started centuries ago. It's been accelerated recently by communication technique, but globalization is really part of the human nature. And to imagine a world without globalization and economy without globalization would be kind of a collective suicide. Globalization is based on markets, it's based on cost, it's based on objective factors. It's not a political, it's not an ideological choice. And I think there is nothing more human than globalization, not only because it's efficient, but also because it's based on the respect we have for each other culture. Second observation I try to make is about the US leadership. I do think, like many, that the US leadership is on the decline, but it's on the decline not because of Trump. It's not because of the mistakes which have been made by the United States. It's an historical decline which reflects the will of the US people. It started with Barack Obama, which decided not to intervene in the Middle East and other complicated situations. So there is kind of a retraction of the US society. And also the US economy is not that dependent on globalization. They import and export very little. And regarding energy, not only they are now self-sufficient, they even export oil and gas. So there are many reasons which are not connected with the current administration in the US, why the US will act less and less as a global leader. This will have some consequences because some countries which are protected by the US military will feel the need to increase their armament spending. It's evident in Japan, it's evident in South Korea, it's evident in Taiwan, but also maybe in the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia, and most probably so in Western Europe. Because of the absence or lack or less US leadership, you'll see an increase in defense spending in many countries around the world, and you cannot exclude that in South America, where everybody is afraid of his neighbor for bizarre reasons, so bizarre, difficult to understand from a European point of view, but which do exist. What about China? Much has been said and written these days, and I don't understand why, explaining that the role of China will increase because of the crisis. The US is out, China is in. I see no rationale explaining this kind of a prediction. On the contrary, I think the role of China will be diminished, and I try to explain why. First of all, the legitimacy of the Chinese government is on the decline because of its lies, and it's on the decline not only in the rest of the world, where we all know that China lied to us, and this has cost us many lives, but it's also in the decline within China. The people in China are absolutely furious against the regime. They know it's a regime of liars. They always knew. They would accept that because they had a strong economic progress. But as you know, this economic progress right now in China has stopped. China is in a recession for the first time since like 25 years. So this economic distress and the lying leadership has a terribly negative impact on the communist regime and on President Xi Jinping. I make no prediction on the future of Xi Jinping, but you cannot exclude the fact that he will vanish overnight because his friend in the communist leadership will take care of him. So the legitimacy of China will go down. The economics in China is weakening, and also we will see many enterprises, many industries mostly getting out of China because they understand more and more that this country is a bit shaky. And also we discover that for some strategic or essential products for our welfare in the pharmaceutical industry, we were totally dependent on China. And people will not accept that anymore. So we will see two trends. Some of these industries will be brought back from China toward our domestic market. This is evident in the US, evident in Europe. And also, you will see investors looking around the world and wondering if there are no countries which are as cheap as China, but maybe more reliable and more predictable. So I think the crisis is a negative for China, very positive for countries like Indonesia, like Vietnam, or like Ethiopia in Africa, for example, and maybe also in a country like Mexico, except that Mexico, the situation is quite shaky at this time. But for China, this pandemic is kind of a disaster, and mostly for the regime. There will be also consequences for the industry. Within the industry, how do you replace a Chinese worker? You replace it with a robot. The robots are not Chinese and they don't get sick. So there will be a repatriation of many industries which are now in China, come back to their countries of origin, and robotization will make very significant progress, which is good mostly for Germany, South Korea, which are the two countries the more productive and innovative in robotization. Now, I said at the beginning that it's difficult to make predictions and you should avoid making predictions. On the other hand, everybody likes to make predictions, or everybody expects predictions. So I will make very rapidly 7 predictions. First one, just already mentioned it, but very rapidly. First one, the pandemic will remain a ticking bomb for a while. I would say 2 years if everything goes well. And I mentioned that Africa will be at the epicenter of this pandemic for the years to come. Second, we underestimate the anxiety among the consumers and among the investors. Because of this anxiety, uncertainty about the future, we'll see less consuming, less investment, and there is a real risk for slow growth for the years to come, at least for the 2 years to come. I don't believe 1 second in a rebound of the economy just because people go back to work again. Many people will be afraid to go back to work again. Many children will be afraid to go back to school again. So it will be a very progressive and slow path to dissolve anxiety. Usually anxiety is not a parameter which is taken into consideration in economics, but I think in this time it should be. Number 3, several activities, mostly service activities, will be impacted for years, or maybe will be wiped out. I mean, the tourism, transports, conventions, our conversation, which is not live. All these activities will be impacted for a very, very long time. So you'll see an in-depth transformation in the service industry. Number 4, we see huge public expenses at the moment, huge public spending at the moment to help people or to help firms to survive the crisis. The debt will be huge. Nobody knows how the debt will be reimbursed, especially if the growth is slow. Increase tariff, increase taxes will lead nowhere or not very far. So we can expect a return of inflation. We used to live without inflation for many, many years now, but you cannot exclude that inflation will be back as a way to reimburse the debt. This is not good news. It's good news for the government, it's not good news for the people, and mostly for the poorest people, which will be impacted by inflation. Number 5, already mentioned, but I want to go back to it just for one moment. I talked about ideological pressures against the free market, against the globalization. This ideological pressure can disrupt the economic recovery or slow down the economic recovery. So it's like, it's like anxiety. Anxiety ideology, it's not part of the economic curriculum, but they are very influencing factor which are extremely influenced. Number 6, political leadership will be more important than ever. You hear that people want or people expect a bigger state, a stronger government. It is not at all my analysis. I don't think people care about a bigger state. They care about reliable government, which is totally different. Reliable government is not necessarily a costly government. A reliable government, it's not a state taking over all private activity. A legitimate and reliable government has 2 qualities. First one, is able to explain clearly what is doing, what is his strategy. Second quality is focusing on what is essential in a state activity, in government activity. What we have seen since many years is governments caring about everything. Your health, the climate, and the saving the penguins in Patagonia, and I don't know what. Okay, they're scattered all around. You have public policies for everything and for nothing. So that's not what the people expect. I mean, the penguins can take care of themselves, but the government should really focus on what is essential, seminal, which is safety. States have been invented historically to preserve the safety of the people. So we have to go back to the origin of what government is about. And of course, we need leaders able to explain this. 7, I think a crisis is always opportunities, as we know. And based on this new worldview, I think there's a lot of space for new services based on the contactless, no contact interaction with the consumer. There is a place for creating new brands, so opening new markets for new entrepreneurs. And Chile is already doing a lot of that. And just an example, when a Chilean company will create a French branch because they are very good on organizing election voting with internet in a totally safe and secure environment. Just an example which comes to my mind because it's one of the rare Chilean company coming to France. But so there is space for innovation, there is space for entrepreneurship, there is not only space for despair. Okay, I'm not pessimistic by nature. I want to I will conclude on an interrogation. I don't know how people will react to all this. Will they stay quiet? Will they become angry? Will they become furious? We have to be extra careful to watch the evolution of the public opinion, and they have in the back of our mind that people today are anxious, tomorrow they can be furious, and they could be looking for scapegoats. So once again, it's not economics as such, it's not politics as such, it's more the mood of the public, which at the moment we don't know. And this I would survey as accurately as possible. And today I think it's my main concern. I mean, to act in a clever and clear way so that people are not furious and are not looking for scapegoats. That would be the worst of our world. Well, thank you very much. And Jaime, I mean, I'll be more than ready to listen to your comment and answer your questions, if you will.
So thank you very much, Guy, for your very good talk. I would like to start by saying thank you to La Otra Mirada and Fundación para el Progreso to permit me to ask you some questions. So despite that you said that you didn't want to make any predictions, I would like to ask your thoughts on how the coronavirus situation will shape the world. So I think there are like three possible outcomes. Like this pandemic is a parenthesis, and then we'll return to business as usual when it's over. Or it's a catalyzer, and it will speed up the processes that were already underway. Or it's an inflection point, and things will be different from now on. You made some examples of this, but so with these outcomes in mind, do you think, what respect to the liberal democracies and authoritarianism, will this pandemic be a parenthesis, catalyzer, or inflection point? And what about the effects on globalization and nationalism? Will be same question, a parenthesis, catalyzer, or inflection point?
A parenthesis, no. Some people would argue differently, reminding that after the Spanish flu in 1918 and 1919, or after the Hong Kong virus in 68, 69, which, by the way, killed many more people than the coronavirus. But it was expanded, in time, and there was no media coverage, so people didn't know. We knew afterwards that it killed many more people than the coronavirus is killing. So it has nothing to do with figures, it has to do with perception. And because of the perception, mostly for the millennials, the people in their 20s, 30s, it is the most important event which ever happened to them. I see that with my children, in their 30s. I mean, nothing ever happened to them. No war, nothing. And suddenly there is this major event, and this will define, I think, their generation. And this is why it is not a parenthesis. So I don't think it would be a catalyzer. An inflection point, yes. I mean, people will start thinking much more than before about the economic regime, sanitary regime, role of government, and they suddenly will discover that they are not protected, neither in their job nor in their health. And they will be comparing and looking for the best system, the best political system. So will they go for authoritarian government, for democratic government, for nationalistic government, or for more globalized government? So it's difficult to say in which direction. What I can say for sure that this generation is impacted. It's important for them. They will look for better regime. I don't think they will go for authoritarian and nationalistic regime. And I say that not only because of my belief, but the way the pandemic is managed show that authoritarian regimes are not doing very well. And it all started because of the Chinese authoritarian nature, okay? And also, when you have countries, government with authoritarian tendencies, like Donald Trump in the United States or Brazil, the results are very bad. So the countries which are doing best are the countries where the society is most open, with free information. And based on free information and the legitimacy which democracy brings, these countries, this regime are doing better. So I think that if this generation does the right analysis, and I think they will see that a more open society is better. And also globalization, they won't be against it because they know it's not a national illness. It's a global illness. And this global illness will be cured by international collaboration. Vaccine, treatment, all this today is based on the cooperation between researchers all over the world. So I do think on a rational basis that this crisis is once again very significant. And to answer your question, I think the trend will be toward a more open society.
Well, we hope that. So one last thing about the pandemic. You said it, that it started in Wuhan, that they tried to cover it up until it was too late. But now China appears to be using its power to determine which country is going to have one of the most demanded things in the world now, the mechanical ventilators. So is the control of the pandemic a tool for hegemony in this century?
Well, that's what the Chinese regime is trying to do. They try to cover up the origin of the pandemic, but really nobody believed them. Even in China, no Chinese believed them. So propaganda doesn't work. I mean, the Chinese regime think that propaganda works and that you can frighten the people. Maybe you can frighten the Chinese, but they can't frighten us. So the propaganda is totally counterproductive. The second stage, they try to distribute ventilators and masks, saying we are here to help, we're so successful. Didn't work either, because the ventilators didn't work and the mask didn't work. Those which were delivered in Italy mostly could not be used. The quality was very poor. And now it's been a bit late, but the US and French industry mostly are catching up very rapidly, and we don't need anything from China anymore. So the second stage of the Chinese propaganda also has been a failure. So the problem with the Chinese regime that they tend to believe in their own propaganda, which is always very counterproductive. But nobody believes in their own propaganda. I have many friends in China. I'm in constant relationship with them, and the Chinese government has really lost all legitimacy, and people are furious of what has happened in China to start with.
So let's talk a little bit about that propaganda, because we share an important commonality, despite that we don't know each other. So we're part of a select club of those who have been insulted and bullied by the China propaganda spokesperson, Ambassador Xu Bu, here in Chile. In my case, for having met with Joshua Wong, one of the most important leaders fighting for democracy in Hong Kong, and for visiting Taiwan. So he accused me of being a threat to the integrity of China, of being an ignorant, so of being a part of a conspiracy with the USA. So maybe it sounds familiar to you. So here's the question. Do you think China is worried that this idea of one country, two systems, and its totalitarian free market regime are in any danger? Otherwise, how can we explain this awkward and open international bullying from the regime and its ambassadors?
Well, first of all, I mean, they are trained to bully you and bully me. That's part of the training. And I did answer the Chinese ambassador in Chile, also in Spain, saying, Mr. Ambassador, each one has to do his work. My work as an independent intellectual is to propose an independent assessment of the situation. You are paid to be the ambassador of a totalitarian regime. So congratulations, you do your work exactly as your employer is expecting from you. So I agree, you are doing your work, I'm doing mine, but we are not doing the same job. I think the Chinese regime these days doesn't feel at ease, because they know they have been wrong. They know they have been wrong. So in a way, there's kind of a excess we see these days in bullying, propaganda. I mean, they've never went as far as that. And when you go as far as that, it means that you have a problem. You have a domestic problem. And not only in mainland China, but also, of course, in Hong Kong and Taiwan, because this crisis comes after the Hong Kong Democratic Revolt and after the success of the pro-independence party in Taiwan. So they know that they all strategy of taking over Asia and convincing the rest of the world that there is a Chinese way. This is not working, so they overreact by propaganda and bullying.
So let's change a little bit on what happened in China, and now let's talk a little bit on the liberal democracy itself. So a few decades ago, you revisited the journey of Alexis de Tocqueville in America and wrote about the state of democracy in the US. Today, I think we're entering an era of post-truth politics where evidence-based policymaking is being trumped, no pun intended, by a political discourse that neglects facts, exacerbates polarization, but above all, it fails in its attempts to reach a common good, which is the building block of a democracy. So when human behavior can be manipulated by social engineering, when institutions are bent by the will of a hashtag, what's the state of a democracy today? Is the liberal democracy as we know it in danger?
Well, people have to learn how these new communication techniques are working. And I think most of the people know now that everything which is on Facebook is not necessarily true. People understand that everything which is on Twitter is not necessarily the truth. So people are learning how to use these new instruments. At the beginning, maybe in 2016, for the first Trump election, people could be shaken by what they read in the social media. Now they know how to read the social media. They understand how this works. It was the same with the written press 1 century ago. People thought that when I was young, people said it's true because it is in the newspaper. That's what I heard when I was young. Now people know it's not necessarily true because it is in the newspaper. So now we know that it's not because it's on Facebook that it is true. So this will be my first observation. Second, liberal democracies globally is doing quite good if we look at the world, if we compare to where it was. I mean, all Europe nearly is Democrat now, even in Latin America. I mean, you don't have many dictatorship left. You have some crazy guys, but the very notion that an authoritarian government and a despot or caudillo is the best way, which was a common wisdom in Latin America. It was caudillism versus democracy. Well, nobody defends caudillism anymore. We know it doesn't work that well. So a long trend is rather positive. And if we focus now on the United States, which is very interesting and significant and brings us back to Tocqueville when he visited there in 1831. What is important in the United States is local government. In the pandemic, what I see, because I'm now in the United States, that nobody cares about what Donald Trump says anymore. We really don't listen. We really don't care. We listen to the mayor, we listen to the governor, and we are back in a way to the origin of the American democracy, which was local. The role of the President of the United States is to defend the country, in a war. But on a day-to-day basis, or confronted to a sanitary crisis like this one, I mean, the instructions doesn't come from Washington. The instruction come from Governor Cuomo, from the mayor of New York. I mean, everything is local. And this is the lesson of the crisis here in the United States now.
Okay, so that guides me to another question, because you also wrote about the importance of strong bonds of community, this neighborhood, all those voluntary organizations that are intermediate between the family and the state. And nowadays, technology makes organizing easier than ever, but also empowers the state, state control, to almost like Orwellian levels. So in essence, these vehicles in which liberty and state power balance each other are in a state of flux. So how can we support the formidable value of those intermediate organizations in this era?
You're right. I mean, the technique goes both ways, and not to give you a theoretical answer. Once again, I will stress what I see these days. In the place where I am, I'm in New York State, I mean, 100 kilometers north of New York City, in a county called Putnam County, 100,000 people. Everything is local. We are getting organized at the county level to bring food to the people who are too old to do the shopping, bringing food to the door of people who are quarantined because they are sick. I mean, you have a it's very American, of course, but you have an extraordinary spontaneity in helping each other at the local level. And the Facebook and all this social media are helpful to create this new kind of association, new kind of circle. And my children being in Paris, I can tell you that it's exactly the same. You know, French people are supposed to be very individualistic, but what we see under the threat is a level of collaboration and solidarity, which is heavily supported by the social media. So I can't tell you in general. I can just tell you what I see now. And now, increased solidarity, neighborhood helping each other, and social media a key ingredient to create this sense of solidarity.
Okay, then that I have to ask you another thing about these Orwellian levels, because even in Western democracies, there is a growing temptation to grant the state the capacity to monitor individuals and their interaction, not just for predictive modeling purposes, but actual individual tracking, like you said they did in Korea. But this has a potential restriction of the individual liberty. So this like dystopian prophecy of Orson Welles. Is that path inevitable? So how dangerous is our temptations to sacrifice freedom for the promise of the virus control or for being more safe?
Well, it is a possibility. And we see in China, for example, that China has gone very far to control the population and very clearly to stop any attempt for democratic movement. But it doesn't work. And in Hong Kong, where people are tracked by the communist regime, and it doesn't prevent them from protesting and taking to the street and asking for democracy. So I don't think that the society is defined by technique. Technique is a neutral or ambivalent tool, but it doesn't play necessarily in the hands of one party against the other party. You know, when the printing press was created, I mean, theoretically it should have reinforced the power of the Catholic Church because they had a new powerful tool, to impose their view of the world. It went the other way around. The Bible was printed in thousands, millions of copies, and this was the beginning of the Reform movement. So I think what happened with the printing press, where you would suppose it would reinforce the central power, it had exactly the adverse result. So I do think it's a little bit the same, that we have a technique which looks like enabling the central state to enforce, but I think it can go the other way around.
So one last question, because you said something about this idea that there's going to be a political tension on building a stronger state or a stronger government, or to do a nationalization of some public goods and whatever. We have that discussion nowadays in Chile. So they are saying that there is an imbalance between the economy and the human life in the capital context. Do you agree with that idea?
Well, politics and economics, it's always about tension and there is no harmony in society, or there's always a tension by definition. And this is why we live in an open society, to be able to debate. So what we should struggle against is we should struggle against people who want to take your right to express yourself. Okay, we should never accept an authoritarian ideologies, authoritarian behaviors. We should always be ready to listen to our adversaries if they are polite, if they are not violent, and if they do accept that, okay, maybe they hold part of the truth, but we also hold part of the truth. So the truth is about sharing different views of the society, okay? And we should be very committed to that, which once again, it's Karl Popper's definition, the open society. I'm ready to accept your point of view. There's something right. I mean, the society is unfair, but what is a fair society? Okay, how do you see that? What do you propose to have a growing economy? Because if you don't have a growing economy, everybody will be poor together, like Cuba or Venezuela. But if we want to be better off, okay, what is the most efficient system? And then how do we rebalance? How do we redistribute? I'm absolutely open to have this kind of conversation. And this is why I was suggesting the so-called negative income tax, basic income for everyone. I mean, ready to discuss that, as long you accept that maybe I'm right and maybe you are wrong. It must go both ways.
So Guy, thank you very, very much for your presentation, for answering my question. He has been very inspiring and very useful for me, and I know that it's going to be very useful and inspiring too for many people here in Chile. So thank you very, very much, and please stay in touch with us. Visit us when you can, and we're going to receive you here with open arms.
Thank you, Jaime. Thank you very much. But now you are on the front and you have to fight. I will shut off my screen and and go back to my study and research. But you are a member of parliament and you have to fight for the open society.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jaime. Bye-bye.